Hans rubbed his eyes as he walked out of the cobblestone inn and into the sunlight. "I'll see you in a couple hours, Agatha. Thank you again for everything," he called out as the door closed behind him. Hans stepped out onto the road made out of broken stone and gravel as he looked around to see if Lars had shown up yet. "Ha! Once I beat him, he must be on his way," Hans thought to himself as he began walking down the street. However, he only made it a few steps down the road before he heard a voice from the alley beside the inn. "Over here," Lars called from the shadows. Hans looked over his shoulder and saw his brother standing beside the cobblestone wall with the hood of his cloak pulled up to shield his face. The young prince made his way over to his brother with haste, and once he was close enough, he quietly asked Lars, "Why are you hiding? From what I've heard, the guards don't typically frequent this part of town." "Not after midday, they don't," Lars responded. "This is a part of their morning routes, though, so you must keep your head down and your face hidden. We can't let the Duke know that we're here." Hans tried to look as natural as he could as he slowly drew the hood of his cloak up over his head. He did his best to not look embarrassed in front of Lars, but his brother could tell by the look on his face. "Don't worry, I didn't learn the guards' routines until my 3rd week here," Lars said. "I almost walked out into broad daylight the same as you." "Thanks, brother," Hans replied. "I have to admit, not having to hide my face in Arendelle, even if it was while I was a prisoner, was a nice feeling for once." Lars nodded. "Arendelle seemed to do well for you, Hans," he added. "Now we have to do the same for it and for the Queen. Actually, it's queens, plural," Hans told his brother, who looked surprised at the correction. "Now, how do we find this Captain Arthur?" he asked quietly as he and Lars began walking through the streets. "I doubt anyone in a tavern at this hour will have much information for us." No, Lars began. "We don't need to go to a tavern. Think about it, little brother. Where are you likely to find a ship captain, or someone who knows about one?" Hans' eyes widened as he realized where he should have been searching for answers all along. "All right then," he nodded. "Let's make our way to the port." The pair of brothers slowly made their way through the dukedom of Weselton, slipping in and out of the crowds as they passed by in order to avoid being in plain view of any patrolling guards. And after a while, Hans could smell the salt of the water being carried through the air from the sea. "How many guards patrol the docks?" Hans asked quietly. "I don't have an exact count, but the port is always busy with fishermen coming and going. So as long as we don't draw any attention to ourselves, we'll be just fine," Lars replied. The sound of the countless footsteps walking across the wooden floorboards that made up the port drowned out all other sounds around them as Hans and Lars headed out onto the docks. Hans looked around for anyone that seemed like they had time to actually talk to them, but almost everyone was moving at light speed as they rushed to get out onto the water. "Do you think any of these people will actually talk to us?" Hans asked his brother. Lars looked around before responding. "I'm sure that there's someone here who knows something. I can hear the uncertainty in your voice, Lars," Hans said. "You've never been a very good liar." Before Lars could respond, both brothers were stopped in their tracks as they heard the sound of a large crash followed by someone yelling out, "Hey, watch where you're walking!" Hans looked over to the source of the sound. He saw a large, bearded man standing over a small, elderly-looking man on his hands and knees collecting the fish from the crate that had been knocked over. "You're lucky I have work to do, otherwise we'd be having a very different conversation, old man," shouted the bearded man as he kicked the crate of fish over again. "Hey!" Hans yelled as he stepped forward. He was surprised to feel Lars' hand reach out and grab his wrist to pull him back. Hans looked back to his brother. "We have to do something." "Let it pass," Lars said, much to Hans' surprise. "He'll walk on in a minute and then we can help, but no need to draw the attention to us, especially if it's a battle that we cannot win." Hans let out a sigh as he looked over at the elderly man who was once again collecting his fish. Just as Lars had told him, the bearded man soon walked away from the commotion, and that's when Hans quickly made his way over to the spilled pile of fish, and without saying a word, he began picking them up and placing them in the crate that was knocked over. "You don't have to waste your time helping an old man like me. There's money to be made, lad," said the old man. Hans continued to pick up the fish. "I'm happy to help. Besides, I'm not in a rush." It took the young prince a couple of minutes to pick up all the fish with the stranger, and when it was all done, Hans stood to his feet and picked up the crate that was now full. "Where are we taking this, sir?" "Sir?" Lars smiled to himself. When did Hans change so much? The elderly fisherman directed Hans where to carry the crate, and it wasn't long before they were heading to a small table where he planned to clean the fish before taking them to his market stall. "Thank you. Young men like you are hard to come by," the fisherman said to Hans. "Yeah, Hans," Lars interjected. "Arendelle seems to have really rubbed off on you." Lars was happy to see his brother acting out of kindness. "Did you say Arendelle?" the fisherman asked. "Yes, sir," Lars responded. "I used to trade with some of the other fishermen from that fjord. My old captain and I used to sail those waters back when I was a much younger lad," explained the elderly man. "A ship captain?" Hans asked excitedly. "Oh yes," the fisherman continued. "Captain Arthur was one of the best men that I ever knew. He keeps to himself a lot nowadays, though." Hans and Lars looked at each other and back to the old man. "This might sound a bit odd, but we are actually in Weselton looking for Captain Arthur. We were told that he had business with the former king and queen of Arendelle, and Queen Anna has sent us to speak with him on her behalf." Hans bowed his head as he continued speaking. "Would you be so humble as to help us find Captain Arthur?" The old fisherman nodded and then proceeded to tell the two brothers they'd be able to find the ship captain at his home in the middle of town. He gave them proper directions for how to get there, and after Hans and Lars both thanked the elderly fisherman for his help, they headed toward the streets of Weselton with their heads down as they weaved their way through the crowd. The pair had almost made it to the port's entrance without drawing any attention to themselves. However, just as they were about to make their way up the stairs and into town, Hans felt someone grab hold of his cloak and pull on it. Hans looked back over his shoulder expecting to see Lars trying to get his attention, but instead he saw Commander Reynolds' face. "What do we have here?" Commander Reynolds said as he looked at Hans and then at his older brother Lars. "Who's this? You better not be trying to double-cross us with the Duke." Hans had a look of terror on his face as he tried to come up with a proper response. "Out with it, Hans," the commander spoke again. "Who is this man that you're with?" "That's my brother, Lars," Hans began to say before Lars stepped in. "Hello, sir. My name is Lars, and I would like to lend the Kingdom of Arendelle my assistance." Hans' brother began to address Commander Reynolds. "Now please, if you'll unhand my brother, I can assure you that we have done nothing wrong." Commander Reynolds looked at Hans and then at Lars and then back at Hans again without saying anything. "If you'd like," Lars continued, "we can show you the way to a particular ship captain that might be able to help the Queen out." Hans let out a loud cough. Lars shook his head and chuckled. "I'm sorry, I meant queens." Commander Reynolds looked back at Hans, who had a small grin on his face. The commander sighed before letting go of Hans' cloak. "All right, but I'm sending Anders and Ingrid with you two. Go wait over there by that fountain, and I'll have them meet you." "Make sure they're not in their armor," Hans said to Commander Reynolds. "We don't want to stick out too much." That same morning, Kristoff, Anna, and Elsa decided to wake up early and meet in Kristoff's room before heading out into Weselton. Once they were all together, Elsa quietly confirmed their plan. "Remember, if anyone asks, we are here to see and speak to the people, but once we're outside," Elsa said as she turned her attention to Kristoff, "you will need to find Hans as fast as you can to see if he's learned anything. I couldn't get any sleep in that room last night. Even though I was sure that I was alone, it felt like there was someone watching me." Elsa shivered. "It gave me chills all night, and that's not an easy thing to do. So we need to figure out what we can and get out of here as soon as possible." "Right," exclaimed Anna and Kristoff in unison. The group slowly weaved through the empty halls of Weselton Manor as they tried to find the double doors that would lead them into the forward courtyard and out into the town. It wasn't long before they found the front doors after backtracking through the manor the same way that they came in. "All right," Anna said as she reached for the door. "Are you ready?" Elsa nodded and Anna began to open the doors. However, when they looked outside, the three of them were surprised to see the Duke standing alongside 7 of his guards. Kristoff and the 2 queens stopped dead in their tracks as they looked down toward the Duke, who was smirking back at them. "And just where do you think you're going?" the Duke said as his group of guards began to advance toward the manor doors. Elsa quickly stepped forward and slammed the 2 doors shut before looking back at Anna and Kristoff. She uttered a single word: "Run!"